I'm going to assign those also to group number 2. What's very helpful here is that the group numbers you've already assigned will appear in a box and you can just click on them. And I'll click OK. I'm going to specify the other haunch section now, the Modify Line tool. And this time the start of my beam will be closest to the 400 section. So in this case I'm going to choose a 400 section to begin with, and then I'm just going to modify the end section to the 450 section I've used for the haunches. And I'll click on OK on that again. And there, now that's all of my steel sections assigned for the main frame. Okay, so in order to be able to view the assigned cross sections in a more realistic way, here in the ISO view I'm just going to toggle on the cross-section contour view. And you can do that by going into the Visualize drop-down menu and clicking on Create Cross-Section Contour. And here you can see my steel sections as they've been created. Maybe a little easier to view in the elevation. And my first point to note here is that my columns are orientated perpendicular to how I'd like them. So I'd like to turn those around 90 degrees to be in the same plane to match with my beams. So in order to do that, first I'm going to switch off the cross-section contours again, and I'm going to do that by going into the AutoCAD Layers toolbox here. And the layer that I need to switch off is called X Solids, and to do that I'm just going to click on the light bulb, turn that off, and then click back on my drawing and then gone. So to realign my column, I'm going to use the Align Elements tool in the Structural Elements tab. And here now in the command line it asks me to select an object, so I'll click on my column. And here in the right-click menu I have the option to select various ways of defining which way I want my column to be orientated. However, it's a little bit difficult when you this time can't see the local axis for the structural element, so I'm just going to press escape and come out of that and show you very quickly how to display the local axis system for that element. If you click on the Tools tab in the SOFiPLUS sidebar, here in the Visualization section, here there are a number of options for you to specify how you'd like your structure to be displayed. I'm going to scroll down here to the Structural Line section, and there I can toggle on and off the coordinate system for my elements, and that's quite helpful when you need to specify the direction of multiple elements. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the Align Elements tool in the SE tab. Again, I'm going to select my column, right click, and I'm going to use the ZZ, set Z direction. And there all I need to do is to select 2 points on a line where I want my Z axis to be. And once I've done that, it gives me further options, and here I'm just going to press Enter for End. I'm going to do the same for the other column now. Go back to Align Elements, and right click, and Z again, and now I just specify the opposite direction, press Enter again, and my two columns are now rotated. Another very quick way of seeing how your sections have been placed, the Orbit toolbar available from the AutoCAD menu here. When you right click on the toolbar, if you turn on the Orbit tool, then what happens is it gives you a preview of the steel sections that have been put in. And just right click and exit from that, and it returns to normal. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to put in some point supports for my frame. I'm going to do this by using the Structural Elements Point tool. And here in the Support Conditions tab, I'm going to select the support in the X, Y and Z direction. Just click once back on my drawing, and then I can specify a point support at the bottom of both my columns and close the tool. So I'm just going to save that briefly, and I'm going to export. I'd like to view my structure in Animator. Now here you can see that my steel sections are all orientated nicely. I have my two supports, and you can zoom in and you can just see the slightly flared section at the end where I've got my interpolated sections and my haunch. The interpolated sections that are created for the haunch, what happens here is that you have interpolated between an IPE 450 and an IPE 400, and depending on how many separate elements your line is split into when you mesh it, it will create some interpolated sections at each point where it's cut. So in here you can quite easily delete all your interpolated sections if you re-specify and you need to remesh. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is to copy my completed frame along my grid line system. So for this I'm just going to go back to a single viewport to make it a little easier to see. So in the viewports drop down menu, I'm just going to select one viewport again. So now I'm going to select and copy my frame, and first I'd like to switch off my AutoCAD layer because I don't want to copy all of the original geometry, and I do this by going back to the AutoCAD layer control toolbox, and in this case my AutoCAD geometry is saved in layer 0, so I'm just going to turn off that light bulb, click back on the drawing, and now I can use the AutoCAD copy tool just to copy along my grid lines. So I'll select my element, right click to accept the selection, and choose my base point, and then I'm going to copy along my grid lines 6 times. And there I have all of my frames in place. The next thing I'd like to do is to specify some strut elements between my frames. And I'm going to do this by going back to the SE tab and using the Create Line tool. Now this time for my strut elements I'd like to use a truss element. And for this I'm going to use my circular section that was defined earlier. Now a warning dialog box pops up here, and it tells me that for cables and trusses the generally recommended option is to mesh as one element. So I can also see in the main dialog box that's repeated. And I'm going to select that and then click back on my drawing. Now I can specify my first point, and all I need to do here is to specify the point on that last frame there. All of the intermediate intersections with the other frames are determined automatically by SOFiPLUS. The next thing I'd like to do is to copy my truss element there to further locations between my frames. So I'm just going to switch my AutoCAD geometry back on and then use the copy tool again. I select my element and choose my base point, and then I'm going to copy to the various points along my frame. Now, one thing that I forgot to do when I just created and copied those is I forgot to assign them to a group. So what I can do again is go back to the Modify Line tool. I can specify each of the elements I want and right click, and I'm going to assign those to a group number 3. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is to create some bracing elements. And we're going to go back to the Create Line tool. I'm going to give them group number 4. And then I'm going to specify this as a cable element. I'm going to use the 20mm section that I defined earlier. Again, I have the same little information box that pops up, which says that generate one element is usually the right meshing option, so I'm going to select that again. You see there's also another information message at the bottom of the dialog box which says for crossing cables the mesh option intersect with other structural elements should be deactivated. And I do want to have my bracing elements crossing over here, so I'm going to do what that says and I'm going to deselect intersect. And what this does is when I want to specify a cable diagonally from two corners of a square area such as this, and then I want to specify in the opposite diagonal direction where they meet in the center, they won't automatically be broken by each other in the way that just happened when we created the truss element between the frames. Okay, so now I have all my settings and I'm ready to start putting those in, so I'll just click once on my drawing and then I'm going to start placing those elements in. And I'd like to stop at that point, so I'll just right click and enter, and then I'm going to trace back along the way and crisscross my cable elements. So I use the line tool again, cable element, section number 4, generate one element, turn off intersection, and then assign again to group number 4. And this time I'm just going to work backwards and just put these in very quickly. And my last point there. So just finally I'm going to save that again, and I'm going to export to CDB. And view the system in Animator.